You may say to me, Jen, why did you decide to start this video right now when it is getting dark outside and the lighting in here is terrible? This is a reading vlog, so I'm going to be filming over many weeks probably, actually. So this is just the very first clip, and the next clip, hopefully, it will not be quite so dark. But I've been meaning to start this video, and I thought if I don't sit down and film it today, well, nothing terrible will happen, but I would like to start filming it today. So welcome, my name is Jen if you're new. Hello, I speak about books on this channel as well as the representation of disability and disfigurement and the history of fairy tales. I'm an author and a book reviewer. And today, for a themed reading vlog, or over the coming months, but in this video that you happen to be watching today, I thought that I would read all of the long-listed books from this year's Barbellion Prize. So the Barbellion Prize is a prize that celebrates work by disabled and chronically ill authors, and they have a real quick timeline. So I don't think I'm going to be able to read all of the long list books before the shortlist is announced, because I think that's in a couple of days, but it doesn't matter. I want to read them all anyway. Last year's winner is one I haven't actually read yet. It's been sitting on my TBR, and that was Golem Girl by River Liera, and this is about living with spina bifida, and it's about art and community. The prize spans fiction, non-fiction and poetry. So I have bought all of the books that were on or are on this year's long list. I've actually already read 2 of them, and I already owned 1 of them. So I purchased the other 5 books. So I'm going to quickly show you what the long list is. I'm not going to talk about each individual book right here, because I'm going to be reading them and then talking about them over the course of this vlog, but just to give you a brief overview. So the 2 books that I'd already read, this is Ill Feelings by Alice Hattrick, and I will quickly mention what this one's about because I've already read it. This is a non-fiction book about Alice having ME and their mum having ME, and then tracking the history of post-viral chronic illnesses throughout the decades and where ME may have manifested in various different forms, and how doctors responded or didn't respond to that. It's a really wonderful book. I read this before it came out and actually blurbed it. It's published by Fitzcarraldo Editions. And then this one is A Still Life by Josie George, which was published by Bloomsbury in early 2021. And in this, Josie chronicles a whole year living with chronic illness and speaking about photography and female friendships and parenting as a disabled person, which I loved all of the aspects of this book. I think that it's a beautifully written book, and I would definitely thrust it into the hands of many people. Both of these books are fantastic, which makes me very excited to read the other books. So the other one that I owned but hadn't read yet is The Coward by Jared McGinnis, and this is a novel, but I think it is very much based on aspects of the author's life. And then the 5 that I didn't yet own, this is Khairani Barokka's new collection, Ultimatum, Orangutan, and I've read some of their work before and really enjoyed it. This is published by Nine Arches Press. This one really sounds up my street because it is inspired by myth and legends and ancient bogs. It's about a deaf child and her grandmother who experiment with the lyrical beauty of sign language. It's called What Willow Says by Lynn Buckle. This next one is a memoir by Jan Grue, which is translated from the Norwegian by B.L. Cook. It's called I Live a Life Like Yours. It's published by Pushkin, and it's about living with spinal muscular atrophy. Then this is Duck Feet. This is set in the mid-noughties at a school in Scotland. It says Duck Feet is relatable, quirky, and sometimes heart-wrenching. It's a coming-of-age novel, an authentic portrait of growing up in working-class Scotland. And then finally, we have another book in translation. This is Claudia Piñeiro's Elena Knows, which is translated from the Spanish by Frances Riddle. And this is, I think, a little bit of a crime novel. I'm not sure, but I'm very excited about it. I'm excited about all of them. So these are the 8 books that I'm going to be reading, well 6 because I've already read 2 of them, over the course of the next few weeks, and I'm going to check in with you at various intervals as I read these, tell you my thoughts, and as usual probably share some recipes and go on some walks as well. So let's chat when it's not nighttime and the lighting isn't quite so yellow. I will see you soon. Good morning. I have already been destroyed by a book. This is both good and also, you know, no one wants to sob. So the first book I picked up is Elena Knows by Claudia Piñeiro, translated from the Spanish by Frances Riddle. And I think I said in the introduction that I thought this was maybe a crime novel. It's not really. The main character, Eleanor, kind of frames it as if it's going to be a crime novel because she thinks that a crime has been committed and she wants to investigate it. So her daughter Rita has died. Everyone thinks that she died by suicide and she says no, and there's a very specific reason why I think that can't be true, so I'm going to prove it. So this is set over the course of one day as she tries to prove or find out what happened to her daughter, and it's split into crypt time. That's the focus of this book really, which I think is the thing that's so fantastic about it. So it's split into 4 different sections for 4 different tablets that she takes throughout the day. Elena has Parkinson's and she needs to take this medication in order for her to be able to move and walk. And before she takes the next tablet, there's always a period where her body kind of stops communicating with itself and she can't move. So it's split into those sections, and that is how her day is framed, and a lot of care is taken over showing all of her decision making. What is she going to do? How is she going to get there? How is she going to time all of those things to maximize movement during the period of time when she's just taken her medication? It's brilliant. I think the reason that I feel particularly emotional about this book is because my grandpa had Parkinson's, and Parkinson's is, if anyone knows anyone who has Parkinson's, or if anyone watching has Parkinson's themselves, you will know what Parkinson's is like, and it is not really to be messed with. It's just not. And I feel that with my grandpa, veering away from the book a second, sorry, just to make this about myself for a second, that's not my intention, but just to kind of to contextualize this book in my personal experience as a reader, which is what we all do when we read a book. I felt I had a really strong connection with my grandpa, because not just because he had Parkinson's. We had a connection with lots of things. I've mentioned him on this channel before. He played the piano, and I also learned to play the piano when I was younger. But with him getting Parkinson's when I was, I don't know how old I was, maybe like an early teen perhaps, and then he lived 10 years after that. I think kind of gave us an understanding of each other when it came to disability of movement. And it's not actually something that we really talked about, because I was a teenager and I didn't talk about stuff like that. And he was a man in his 70s, 80s, and he wouldn't talk about that either. But I feel like we had quite a strong understanding of patience and pain and movement and other people's opinions of those things too. So I guess I'm declaring my bias towards the book is primarily what I'm doing. Before we get back to the book, I want to throw in this thing, which I always remember when he was in hospital, right at the end of his life, because he'd had a fall, which is, you know, it's very common if you have Parkinson's. He had a fall and he'd broken his hip, and my grandma was upset. She really wanted him to get better, because obviously she did. She's like, you need to try harder to get better. And then she went home, and my grandpa gave one of the nurses some money to go downstairs in the hospital to buy some chocolates to put in a taxi to send to her house to apologise. And that just, I mean, I'm laughing but also internally just crying, because it is just the loveliest thing, and also the saddest thing as well, this battle with trying to get better when you can't. So I had a little cry, pulled myself together. Okay, so this book, what I both like and don't like about it, but you're not supposed to like about it, is that Elena is actually not the nicest person in the world. She has a lot, I was going to say, of internalized ableism. She has a lot of outward ableism, actually, a lot of it. And she's talking about her relationship with her daughter, and they used to fight a lot, and that used to happen before she got Parkinson's. And it's highlighting how, you know, things don't stop being complicated in everyday ways when disability is involved. All of the other stuff is still there. And also, not everyone in your life will be able to be what you need at a certain point, and that's true obviously for everyone. I'm stating lots of obvious things here, but not everybody is made to be caring, is kind of what this book is focused on, and that is in lots of different capacities, either as a carer or just as a daughter looking after their mother in an emotional sense, or as a mother caring for their daughter. So it looks at people's capacity for care and compassion, and then also what it's like to, in this case, lose your daughter when you didn't actually have a great relationship with them, and how painful that is because you can't fix it because they're not there anymore. So this crusade almost that Elena is going on to try and find out why her daughter died is her way of caring, and is her way of trying to find answers. And tied into this book, we've got a lot of commentary on the bureaucracy of being a disabled person and paying for healthcare, getting all the forms that you need, and how much of a quite literal headache that is. Claudia Piñeiro is an Argentinian author, and in the bio at the front it says that she has become a very active figure in the fight for legalization of abortion in Argentina and Latin America, and for the recognition of employment rights for women, and those things also play quite a big part in this book. And at one point I was wondering just how these themes were going to come together, but I feel like they really do. I think the pacing of this book is flawless, and I think that the emotional impact of it and how it all comes together is really well balanced. It's only January, but I could see this being one of my favourite books of the year, even if it did, you know, kind of destroy me inside a little bit. So that is the first book that I read, and I would very much recommend it. And the next book I think I'm going to move on to is The Coward by Jared McGinnis, and I think that I might pick this one up on audio, because I think it's the only one out of the ones that I haven't read that is available on audio. So I'm going to pick that up, and I'm going to go for a walk tomorrow probably. So I may insert some footage here of said walk, and then I will come back to you and talk to you when I've read some more. Hi, good morning. I've been listening to the audiobook of The Coward by Jared McGinnis. This is a novel, but the main character is also called Jared McGinnis, so it's really blurred. And the note that Jared put at the front of this book says, "The distance between fiction and memoir is measured in self-delusions." I'm going to be honest and tell you that the reason I didn't pick this book up before now is because the reviews that I had seen of it kept calling it a really inspiring novel. And if there's anything that's going to put me off reading something about disability, it's that. But I'm guessing it's just non-disabled book reviewers calling this book really inspiring, because obviously it's a word that Jared and most disabled people hate. It even says in his bio at the back, mostly he inspires the able-bodied by using public transport and taking his daughters to the playground. This book is about a man called Jared who is in a car accident, and the person he was in the car with dies, and he's told that he's going to be a wheelchair user going forward. Obviously, any adjustment period for disability is really challenging, mainly because of access and society views towards disability, but also there is a grieving process that comes with disability. And there's always, I was going to say a big difference. I think it can be a big difference, not always, but definitely a difference between those who are born disabled and those who acquire a disability in later life. The discourse is always a little bit different. There is a lot of jokes highlighting the everyday ableism that you experience if you are a wheelchair user. You know, he's drinking a coffee at one point and someone walks past and goes, "Don't drink and drive." The main point of this novel is that because Jared has had this accident, he has to reconnect with his father, who he hasn't spoken to in years. So some of this novel is set in the present day with flashbacks to what their relationship used to be like before he left home. And they're both really complicated characters, and sometimes you're rooting for one of them and sometimes you're rooting for the other one, and I'm really enjoying that dynamic, so I'll continue to listen to that. And speaking actually of the difference between acquiring a disability and being born with a disability, I thought now would be a good time to answer a question that many of you have been asking me, and that is what I thought of Hawkeye, the new series that came out on Disney Plus in the autumn. I am a big Marvel fan, and when we love something, it's also very okay to critique it, and I have written articles and also spoken a lot on here about the representation of disability, not just in comic books in general, but media as a whole, and I'll link some resources in the description box down below. And I really loved going to Comic-Con in the Netherlands in 2017 or 2018? I don't remember, but it was a few years ago now, and talking on panels about the representation of disability in comic books and in the Marvel films with a lot of disabled viewers. Basically, if you haven't heard me talking about this before, there are exceptions to the rule, but a lot of the time in comic books and in other mediums, disability is used as a marker for villainy or as punishment for someone to show the audience that we should fear them. And there have been attempts to kind of change that going forward, and I was really excited about watching Hawkeye because they were going back to part of the key element in the Hawkeye comics, in that Hawkeye is hard of hearing. It varies a lot, obviously, in different comic book series because Marvel is a multiverse and there are lots of different writers. Sometimes he's deaf, sometimes he has hearing loss, sometimes he's hard of hearing, sometimes he's miraculously cured, but they've never addressed that in the films. So I was really excited to see that they were incorporating being hard of hearing into Hawkeye's character going forward, especially as Jeremy Renner, who plays Hawkeye, has said that he is also hard of hearing himself. I was apprehensive about them bringing in Echo because they were presenting her as the bad guy, and she is an amputee and she is also deaf. But side note, without going into spoilers, I guess, for the TV series, everyone apart from Fisk, who is kind of, you know, he's a villain. Everyone who's in that show isn't really a good guy or a bad guy. There is so much going on in their character, and I enjoyed that a lot. So what could have been something that they would have relied on in the past to highlight badness actually became really interesting. And Alakwa Cox, who plays Echo, is Native American, is deaf, and is an amputee herself. So I was so thrilled that they were going with representation from people with lived experiences. I thought that that was very exciting, and yes, thank you. I really enjoyed watching the series. I mean, let's face it, Hawkeye is not the most exciting Marvel character, so I thought that they had enough, sorry Hawkeye, but they had enough other characters to make it really interesting. I did think that there was inconsistency when it came to representation of his hearing loss, and I didn't really feel though that they respected sign language when it was on screen, because Echo was using sign language a lot, but then they relied on subtitles instead of showing her hands all the time, which I thought was a missed opportunity, and as I said, a little bit disrespectful. But on the whole, I really loved it. I also would like to link Jessica's video down below. She did a whole video about the representation of deafness in Hawkeye, and she's a deaf person herself, so you should definitely listen to her more than me. But just from my point of view, I really enjoyed watching it. Definitely prefer it to Daredevil, which I also enjoy very much, but obviously Daredevil, I wonder if they would do it the same way if they made it now, because I think the first series came out in 2014, and I think that's right. Charlie Cox plays him, who has no vision loss, and the way that he talks about blindness in interviews is sometimes quite frustrating. There was a whole interview that I watched recently, actually, where he was talking about how they tried giving him contacts when he first started playing Daredevil to try and limit his vision. And he laughed and said he just became hopeless on set, and he was very frustrating to deal with because he couldn't do anything, and it was just ridiculous him being actually blind. So they realized that he couldn't be blind and they would have to have him as a sighted person, and that was just the easier way to do things. And I just wonder if people listen to themselves when they say stuff like that, because kind of hints towards why the representation of Daredevil himself as a character who is blind is perhaps just not that great, you know? It falls into that trap of, oh, my disability is my superpower, my senses are so heightened that actually I'm not really blind anymore. And yeah, especially as in the final series, there are several times where he uses his disguise to be a vulnerable blind person, pretending that he needs people's help to coax pity out of people, and then as soon as they get near, he knocks them out. And I'm like, that's maybe we don't do that anymore. So, you know, yes, really like Charlie Cox as an actor, and I think to the best of his ability, he does Daredevil in a great way. But it would be so fascinating to see how they could actually do Daredevil in the way that they have done Hawkeye. That would be something I just want that. I want that so much, but I think it's a bit late. We're gonna have to wait a few decades for another remake, I think. So that's to answer that question that I have been asked quite a lot, and I'm very excited about Hawkeye. I did try and watch The Eternals because I was also very excited about the deaf representation in that too, but I found the film really boring, so I stopped watching it. So yeah, I really hope that this is something that continues, that this representation gets better, and that they also involve disabled writers more, because I think that's how we're going to progress, as well as having disabled actors too. It's very exciting. Anyway, so I am continuing to listen to The Coward on audiobook, and I have also read Ultimatum Orangutan by Khairani Barokka. This is a poetry collection, and it completely demands all of your attention. This is a collection that examines the intersection of climate crisis, capitalism, disability, and race, and it is intense. Her language choices when she's talking about chronic illness in particular are amazing. Two of my favourite poems in this collection were called Pain Speaks to Oka and Give Me a Pass. And in Pain Speaks to Oka, she refers to chronic pain as this horizontal lake castle. And I just had to stop and sit and think about that phrase for a moment, you know, where everything feels kind of fluid and hazy, and your bed is your kingdom. I love that so much. She refers to her body further down as a fear-wrapped flesh blanket, which I also really loved. I think there's a really interesting conversation to be had between this collection and Josie George's book, A Still Life. The bit that I remember the most from Josie's book is where she talks about pain being like weather, and that's how she copes with it, thinking as it almost passing through her, and it's something that she has to deal with on that given day, and maybe tomorrow's weather will be very different. And there is a quote in one of Khairani's poems called Rest Stop, which says, "Lashingly, I realise this is what's meant by being under the weather," being weighted down by this weather. So we say we're under the weather when we're feeling unwell, but if pain is weather and it's moving through you and weathering your body, then you are under that weather. You are being ruled by it perhaps sometimes, or feeling as though you are being pushed down by it. It feeds into that image of fluidity too. If chronic pain is being in that horizontal lake castle under the weather of your pain, just that whole image is amazing. There's also one line where she talks about illness being the full teeth of ghosts, which I just felt in my bones. As I said, there is also loads in here about capitalism and exploitation and climate crisis, specifically focusing on Indonesia, which is where Khairani is from, and talking about Java in particular, and campaigns that have been launched to save the orangutans because of use of palm oil. But she's like, that's great, yeah, we should talk about that, but really we should not be using palm oil because we're trying to save humans as well, right? And whenever she says that, people go really quiet because they're like, well, no, but we just want to talk about the orangutans. So yeah, there is a lot to think about in this book, and I appreciated it very, very much. So that's where I'm at with my reading. I'm going to continue listening to The Coward on audiobook. In physical form, I'm going to pick up Duck Feet by Eli Percy next. So I'll come back to you when I have read those. And right now I'm going to make pizza. I made some pizza dough last night. It's been rising slowly in the fridge. Might attempt making a white based pizza, which I don't normally do, but I'm going to play around in the kitchen and see what I come up with. I hope you're having a good day. That pizza was delicious. It was an experiment that went right, and they don't always go right in the kitchen. But when I was doing the weekly food shop last week online, I saw that truffle pesto was for sale for like £1, and I thought that might be nice as a base with some mozzarella, and it was. And then once I'd cooked it, I added rocket and balsamic, and it was delicious. You couldn't eat loads of it, obviously, because that's quite strong flavours, but it was yum. All right, back to books, because that's why we're here. As I mentioned in the last clip, I was going to go to Duck Feet by Eli Percy, which is exactly what I did. I am actually going to part ways with this one. I have read about half of it, and I really respect it, and I think it's very good in many ways, but I'm just not going to get out of it what I maybe would have got out of it if I'd read it 10 or 15 years ago. You know, every experience of reading a book is based on who we are at the time and place that we read it, and if, as I said, this has been thrust into my hands 10-15 years ago, I think I would have really loved it then. It's not really what I look for in a book anymore, but there are so many people that I would recommend this book to, so let me recommend this to you. This is told in Scots dialect, which I love. I love reading things in dialect. I know not everyone does, which is why I'm mentioning it. I will also say that the text is really, really small. I'm gonna have to get an e-reader at some point so that I can make text bigger, but if you have vision issues, bear in mind that the print edition has very small text, and I'm really hoping that the more people read this, the more likelihood there is of it there being an audiobook for this, because I think an audiobook would be amazing, because as I said, the voice in this is just brilliant, and I enjoy writing in dialect myself. I often write in Geordie, especially poetry, because I'm from the northeast of England, and there's so much similarity between Geordie and Scots, so I didn't find this difficult to read in that sense at all. It's about a character called Kirsty Campbell. She's navigating school life. It's talking about class and family, bullying, sexuality, teenage pregnancy, drugs, loads of different things in here. It does feel like a diary, and in that respect it is like Adrian Mole meets Derry Girls almost, but because it's written like a diary, I feel as though the pacing is really uneven, because it feels as though things are written about in real time. Equal weight is given to lots of different things that in retrospect you probably wouldn't give equal weight to, and I found that a little bit frustrating. I was going to say as a reader, but also as an editor. Reading the back of this book, I see that lots of this has been published separately in other places, and it does feel like that, like lots of fragments have been gathered and then not edited down as much as maybe I personally would have liked. But it is still very hilarious in places, and it is still heartbreaking in places, and if you like the sound of Adrian Mole meets Derry Girls, then definitely do take a look at this and see if it's something you would like to pick up. I've also finished reading The Coward by Jared McGinnis. The pacing in this, I think, is really, really good. It feels like it's the next great American novel, or at least that's what it's trying to do, because it's covering lots of ground when it comes to time, jumping back and forth from the present to the past, lots of small reveals along the way, and families learning from each other, lots of redemption, things about forgiveness. And the narrator, Jared, has this great sense of foreboding that something terrible is always going to happen, which makes you as a reader really nervous that this is foreshadowing and something terrible is going to happen. And when is that going to happen? And lots of shocking things happen in this book that really punch you quite a bit. And there were moments when I equally wanted to slap Jared, the narrator, because he makes decisions that are absolutely infuriating, and you know that they're not the right decisions that he should be making. But feeling infuriated means that the book is doing its job and really getting under your skin. There is much, much, much to like in this book. And then I read What Willow Says by Lynn Buckle. And this one, I think I need to get my pen and underline some things, because I did lots of dog earing, which I don't like to do, not because I don't want dog ear books, I don't care about that, but just because it's not a permanent thing, and if I don't underline the thing that I wanted to underline, the page will become undog-eared and then I will forget. So let me just go and underline the things that I meant to underline. I only dog ear if I don't have a pen to hand, so let me go and underline the things I meant to, and then I will come back to you so I can talk to you properly about it. Okay, I'm in danger of wanting to quote this entire book at you, so I will behave and not do that. This is a novel about a grandmother and a granddaughter, and they live in the woods, and I felt as though a lot of this book reminded me of Captain Fantastic, the film with Viggo Mortensen, where he and his kids live in the wilderness and they try and forget about the rest of the world and what the world wants from them. The granddaughter is deaf, and she and the grandmother have this way of communicating both with each other and with the trees around them. And there are beautiful passages where she talks about how it looks as though the trees are signing when they move. And this language is not official sign language. And it reaches a point where the grandmother realizes, okay, maybe I'm being selfish because the granddaughter is going to be alive for longer than I am. She's going to need to communicate with the rest of the world in a way that's more formal. So the granddaughter does learn sign language, and then there's a grieving process because the grandmother finds it hard to learn the sign language because it's hard to learn a language, especially as an older person. And there's a lot of conversation surrounding loss and gain and what people's assumptions may be as to what that should be. So at one point the granddaughter goes to have hearing aids fixed, and the grandmother thinks, well, let's talk about the loss of that, because obviously disability aids are amazing. They're also not for everyone, and they also won't work for everyone either. And she's worried that the granddaughter is losing her way of experiencing the world by being not forced, I suppose, but expected to want to wear a hearing aid and to want to be part of the hearing world in as conventional way as is possible, focusing really heavily on the medical aspects of being deaf. So much of this book is about not having answers for these things and just giving space to saying, hey, I mean, are there right and wrong answers here? Because I don't really know. There are many points in the book where the grandmother also acknowledges her own jealousy. She has created this language and way of communicating with the granddaughter, which she loves. And then when she sees the granddaughter using a more formal sign language with people outside of their bubble, she feels really jealous and also guilty for feeling jealous. The granddaughter will often ask what certain things sound like. So she signs that pigeons sound like velvet and that a wind is blowing overhead, which sounds green. This book's definition of sound, it includes colour and movement, and then a lot of this text is told in rhyme, which I think is a fantastic decision and not something that you might notice straight away because it's quite subtle. Let me read you an example. I am fortunate that we had no sons to suffer this ignominy. The thought of them turning into leathered purses disturbs me. We did go on to have more children. Some miscarried, one stillborn, one in the river and two left, now safely flown. Not a male among them. Not even the ones who chanced their odds and lost. It's easy to forget that this woodland floats on an island above cutaway bogs. I really adored this, and I think I'm going to be rereading it many times. In many ways, it feels like walking through a wood, that there's just so much to pay attention to and you can't possibly take it in on one walk. So you're going to have to go for another walk in the future. All right, only one book left, and that is I Live a Life Like Yours by Grue. So once I've read that, I'll come back to you, talk to you about it, and then I want to tell you my order of this long list and what I would personally shortlist and compare that with the shortlist that has been announced, which I haven't looked at yet. So I don't know which books have been shortlisted. I'm gonna pick my personal shortlist and winner and then look at the shortlist that they have announced and see if we have similar thoughts. So I'll be back in a day or so. I began this video when it was getting dark, and I'm ending it when it is getting dark as well. It is Sunday. I made an apple pie today, as you will have seen, and if you would like the recipe, I'll link a previous vlog down below where I showed the recipe in full. Mr. M and I also went for a walk on Hampstead Heath today, which was very chilly, but also very nice. And we ran into Jack and Pumpkin, who are two creatures who very occasionally I have run into over the years on Hampstead Heath, and it always brings me joy when I do, because who doesn't want to run into a fox who is out for a walk? This is Jack and this is Pumpkin. Pumpkin is a fox and Jack is a Westie, and they are owned by a woman called Anna, who is a vet, and she adopted them after they came into the surgery for different reasons. Lola doesn't seem to realise that Pumpkin is a fox, which I'm very glad about, because Lola loves chasing foxes and that would be an embarrassing pet owner moment. But maybe domesticated foxes smell very different. They must, I guess. This is maybe something that I need to research. Anyway, I have finished reading all of the books that have been longlisted for this year's Barbellion Prize. The last one that I read is I Live a Life Like Yours by Grue, which is translated from the Norwegian by B.L. Crook. This book I would really recommend for fans of Rebecca Tausig's Sitting Pretty, which is a fantastic book and was one of my favourite books of 2020. The way that Jan writes about disability and parenthood and writing of the self really reminded me of Rebecca's writing in a fantastic way. So I would pair those two together. Definitely. He is writing about his childhood and then also studying, talking about disability in various different ways. And the thing that fascinated me most about this book was the impossibility of writing about the self and discussing that. Obviously, that would be the thing that appealed to me the most as a disabled author myself, but I found everything he had to say on that subject really fascinating. So he is referring to patient notes that he has, I guess, requested from the hospital, and looking at that and seeing a different person, because it's an entirely different language. And he's trying to use that at first to illustrate historically his memories of disability, but he finds that it doesn't really work. And he says, "It is and it isn't like this. I don't wish to slip surreptitiously into the discourse I present here. I want rather to push it along. I want to feel the sweat and toil as I carry out this task. This book cannot begin until I have found its language, and by the time the language exists, the book will be finished and all of the work will be done." Later, he says in the same vein, "I am trying to write myself out of others' language. I am trying to write myself out of the gaze of others. For each layer that I take away, the less certain I am that anything inside can be described. What would it mean to describe which is unseen, which only exists for itself?" Sorry, I just needed to adjust how I was sitting. I'm going to throw another quote at you. "Stigma cannot be eliminated through action, even if you can camouflage it or suppress it, for the simple reason that its root is not in what one does, but in who one is. It is who one is, or who one is perceived to be, that shapes the framework for how our actions are interpreted, so that even the most innocent acts can take on a shameful dimension. When I take care with how I dress, when I make sure to keep my wheelchair clean, when I take pains to behave correctly, it is in part because I know how other signals, other traits will be interpreted." This is a great book. Really, really enjoyed that. Okay, so I've read all 8 books now, and I'm going to try and put them in some kind of order. Hold for 1 second. Okay, I've done it. Like with any list, if you ask me any other day of the week, it may change slightly, but this is 8 to 1, and 1 being my favourite. as it stands today. Number 8 is Duck Feet by Eli Percy, which, as I said, I very much respect, but just isn't for me right now. This is Ill Feelings by Alice Hattrick, which was the non-fiction book about ME. Then we've got The Coward by Jared McGinnis, which was the great American novel. Then we've got the non-fiction book I just talked about, which is Jan Grue's I Live a Life Like Yours, translated from the Norwegian by B.L. Crook. In 4th place, Khairani Barokka's Ultimatum Orangutan, which is the poetry collection that touches on climate crisis, disability, and lots of other subjects. 3rd place, Still Life by Josie George, which I didn't read in this vlog, but I read last year and really, really loved. It's about chronic illness and parenthood and female friendship and photography. In 2nd place, What Willow Says by Lynn, which is about sign language and the forest. Then this is Elena Knows by Claudia Piñeiro, which is translated from the Spanish by Frances Riddle and would be my personal number 1 from this long list. Since I have started filming this video, the Barbellion Prize have announced their shortlist, and I haven't looked at it because I didn't want to know what their shortlist was, but let's look at it now and grab my phone and see what books they have shortlisted and if we have any crossover. Okay, let me go to Instagram and find them there. Barbellion Prize. Oh, that is interesting. Okay, so they have picked 4 books for their shortlist out of the 8, and 3 of their 4 books are in my top 4. And then they also have Duck Feet by Eli Percy. So they have Duck Feet, they have What Willow Says, Ultimatum Orangutan, and Still Life, but they don't have Elena Knows. Okay, so out of their top 4, my winner would be What Willow Says by Lynn, and I think they're announcing the winner on the 12th of February. So if you want to follow the prize, I will link them in the description box down below and you can see who wins when that is announced. I would love to know which books out of these 8 particularly call to you. I'm very happy that I have read all of these books and discovered some fantastic authors in the process. I hope that you have enjoyed this video. If you're new to my channel, I would love it if you would subscribe. That would be fantastic. And also if you enjoy my channel and fancy supporting me over on Patreon, that would be very kind. That's always linked in the description box down below. I hope that you're all having a very good start to the week and I will see you very soon. Bye.